Cross-examination of former executive member of the Working People's Alliance WPA, Dr. Omali, concluded on October 29, 2014 before the Commission inquiring into the death of Guyanese historian Dr. Walter Rodney. During the cross-examination, Dr. Omali told the Commission that as a result of the nature of his work as organizing secretary of the WPA, he received death threats and was followed. However, the WPA attracted supporters from various ethnic groupings in Guyana in spite of the political challenges faced during that period, Omawali told the Commission.
The WPA was attracting a lot of the PPP members, and therefore the threat could have come from the PPP itself. At the time, tell us if you can remember, from which quarter did you feel that that threat was coming from?
It was clear that the person was advising me that the state apparatus had elements that were wanting to kill me. That was my understanding. Specifics I don't recall, but that's my understanding. That's how I felt.
So that if it was the state apparatus, would that have ruled out the PPP?
I would think so, yes.
No, I don't want to take it for granted. I want you to say, as you felt at the time. With hindsight, everybody has perfect vision, 20/20 vision, but if you could throw back your mind at the time.
No, as a result of that warning, I was not concerned about danger from the PPP.
In terms of your supporters and members of the WPA, let's deal first with supporters. As you yourself you have said, the politics in Guyana was ethnic-based. Indo-Guyanese, in the main, supported the PPP. Afro-Guyanese largely supported the PNC. Did you attract supporters from both major races?
Absolutely. That was the basis of the Working People's Alliance popularity.
And what about your membership?
Membership also reflected that.
So it was not only Indo-Guyanese alone that you attracted both as supporters or as members?
Not at all.
So would you say that you had made inroads amongst your members or membership in both major political parties at the time?
That would be a reasonable conclusion. I never thought of it as making inroads. I thought of it as working with people who were concerned about joining us. Where they came from was not the issue for me, but that would be a reasonable conclusion. That some would have come from the PPP and some would have come from membership of the PNC.
You know, there's the concept of floating voters, people who are not anchored in any one of the parties, and depending on what you tell me in your manifesto, right, or what promises you make on your platform, I will consider voting for you. At the time, did you have that feeling that they were floating voters or floating? Yes, let's leave it at floating.
Floating might be a reasonable term to use. I mean, I would probably make a distinction between a frontline activist of a political party and a person who is a political party member and supporter.
Yes.
And those members and supporters you might be regarding as floating, as opposed to the activists who are at the center of the party.
If I may take you back to Ohini Kwama. You said he was assassinated. Mr. Williams put to you that he was found with arms and I think at least one rifle. I'm not sure if it was a 3 or 3 he put to you. Was there any report that he was involved in any kind of shooting or combat with the police? He engaged them in action, or he was just simply driving and was killed?
As I recall, the police allegation was that they felt that he was threatening them with a weapon. I was not there, and I don't know what the evidence is. But I certainly did not believe that he was involved in any illegal activity.
But did they report, or was it publicized? You know, very often we see reports that X, Y, or Z who is found dead, police claim that they were shooting at the police, exchange of gunfire, and man is killed. Was there any such report?
Not an exchange of gunfire, but the fact that he apparently, I recall the report saying that he had a weapon, and the police therefore shot him. That's my vague recollection of the time.
Can you, last area, last question. This concept of paramountcy of the party, as Mr. Williams put to you, the three major political parties at the time were all espousing socialist doctrines or Marxism, Leninism, as the case may be. But you seem to disagree with him on this concept of paramountcy of the party. Was it because of the way you saw it being implemented by the ruling party at the time?
That certainly would have disabused us of any attraction to that concept. What we saw did not comport with our notion of freedom, democracy, and socialism.
He told commissioners that there was no democracy under the Forbes-Burnham-led People's National Congress regime during the 1978 to 1980 period.
In the Guyana Chronicle of June 5, 1979, there is a report on that Congress. And the then Prime Minister Forbes-Burnham, it was reported that it was boycotted by the PPP. And the then Prime Minister explained what he thought the Constituent Assembly should be. And he's quoting us saying it should be a real democracy, an assembly of a real people's forum, that he wanted full participation, that he agreed that fundamental rights such as the freedom of worship and of assembly, the holding of regular periodic elections must be protected. However, that represented only one side of the coin. He spoke also of the respect for other human and fundamental rights, such as the right to work, the right to be taken care of, to education. And he said that he was expecting that the Constitution would gain majority support, and not 100% for support, but majority support. So all these statements attributed to the then Prime Minister Burnham seem to indicate a commitment to democracy and respecting the rights of people. Yet your evidence that you have given so far has been to the contrary. Are you aware of utterances such as this by the then Prime Minister between 1979 and 1980?
I have heard tell of them, but the practice that we experienced made us believe that these were words not necessarily to be followed by action.
Meantime, the day's proceedings continued with Nirmal Rohit Kanai, a former member of the WPA who is an expert in the area of electronic equipment, taking the stand. He explained to the Commission the piece of equipment used to kill Walter Rodney was a military device.
A walkie-talkie is set a specific frequency. Two persons communicate. You speak, and the other person would receive the signal. When you rate it to the ratings of the portaphone, it is deliberately designed to exclude any other signal.
Thank you.
So outside interferences cannot interfere with the portaphone?
No, it would not.
In other words, are you saying that it would be a secure, that frequency would operate on like a secure channel and wouldn't be susceptible to spurious signals? I think that is the word used.
No, the selectivity rating tells you spurious signals cannot trigger it. I think in one of the documents, it possibly was the post-mortem, there is some summation of acting furtively and handling the package with care, suggesting they probably had some nitroglycerine or something that you see in movies. The technical composition of TNT is used by the military. It is deemed bulletproof. If it's shot at with a gun, it's hit by a bullet, it would not explode. So it's a very stable explosive. In relationship to the detonator, there are certain peculiarities. It's susceptible to static electricity, susceptible to frictional forces, susceptible to impact. These are things that can accidentally trigger it. The fact that it was inside of a box, Dr. Rodney's hands were at the side, as Dr. Skuse and Dr. Johnson's report concurs, meant he was not handling the device at the time. That being the case, it could not have gone off accidentally, given the fact that no frictional forces, no electrostatic forces, no impact was present. And that would lead, and did lead Dr. Skuse to the conclusion, this thing was activated by a signal. So
you're saying that by the very nature of TNT, that makes it has to be deliberately set off because of its very nature, as opposed to other types of explosives
this is why
that are more volatile, perhaps.
This is why the military uses it. It's
Was
stable.
TNT found in the...
TNT is identified as the explosive substance used.
We have to start there so that we have it on the
Yes,
record.
Dr.
You understand?
Skue's report is very clear on that.
But let me carry you back to your findings thus far. The first one that I have is that the device was triggered by an external source.
Yes, sir.
Good. The second one is that it was deliberately triggered.
Yes, sir.
And now you're giving us the third, focusing on a specific component used, that TNT. The TNT was again deliberately triggered.
Yes, sir.
And it could not have been triggered by the handling of it within the car by Dr. Rodney,
Definitely not.
according to the findings both of the post-mortem and Dr. Skuse.
And in each case, deliberately triggered means outside by external force.
Yes, sir.
But there is something you said. You said the TNT is very stable. Even a gunshot will not cause it to explode. But you said there was something else that could be activated by friction.
That's the detonator.
The detonator.
Yes.
But the way the device was built and how the experts who looked at the debris before you did, say Dr. Rodney was holding it, there would not have been the opportunity for that friction.
Yes, it definitely ruled out that possibility, and that is why the report, I would argue, was hidden away and too incriminating to be brought to the courts, even though it was commissioned by the very regime.
I'm attracted to another finding, and that is that TNT is normally used by the military.
Yes, it is, precisely because it is very stable in terms of it being hit by a bullet. It would not detonate it.
Because we cannot ignore the background of Gregory Smith and the fact that he was himself a member of the military.
Yes, sir. But I would like to point out this is why you're dealing with explosives on the peculiarity of it on one hand and the electronics on the other hand, and then I have to bring everything together without explaining some of these things. So when you ask me for a conclusion, it has to pull all the strands together.
Could we hear next about the additional finding, if any, or conclusion?
I think that sums up the very basic facts. There's a lot of fine details. One other important issue was the amount of explosives used. And that, I think, is very significant.
But tell us, you found 2 ounces, half ounce, what? Tell us.
Based on the information provided by Dr. Thurman, in this case, in his work, Practical Bomb Scene Investigation, we have charts. He gives us a table where he uses 1.6 ounce of a TNT, and he shows what damage it does to the human body. Now, there's a significant statement in the post-mortem report of Dr. Johnson. He says, heart, healthy and uninjured. Now, here's an explosive device sitting in the lap of Dr. Rodney. It explodes, and the damage done to his body is such, and even the lungs and other areas. It is definitive that the quantity of explosives could not have been more than 1/4 pound. You stretch it as you like. You cannot make a case for it to be more than 1/4 pound.
Why are you saying that?
Because the chart is given, he gives you the pounds per square inch of a quantity of explosives. And when you extrapolate from the chart, you will see that there is no way. He actually gives you 1 pound of explosive, the damage it would do to a motor car. It would blow the motor car to pieces, kill the occupants in the car. And when you measure that compared to the actual incident, the damage done to the car and those things, even then, you can't even justify that amount of explosives. You had Donald Rodney sitting next to his brother. When you use the chart again, you will see that you exceed 1/4 pound of explosives. Donald Rodney would have been killed or seriously injured and things of that nature. So from...
Okay, but given the injury that Walter suffered and Donald suffered, what are you saying? That the amount was 2 ounces and not more than that? 4 ounces?
It is definitely not more than 4 ounces. That we can say with certainty.
And it's likely to be less.
Likely to be less.
And I'm not putting words in your mouth, but I'm saying that because you said even 4 ounces would likely have led to serious injury to Donald Rodney, who was sitting right beside his brother.
Yes.
Thank you.
But may I ask you, Mr. Kazai, given the physical size of these walkie-talkies, the portaphone, could it have accommodated a pound of TNT?
No, it would not have, but from the fact it was supposedly in a box and placed in the box, there's no need to say it was inside of the walkie-talkie. And it certainly was not inside of the walkie-talkie because there was no container found that houses the metal housing of a walkie-talkie would have been found. Basically, I think it was the circuit board, more than a complete set found.
So your finding is that whatever explosive, the TNT that triggered the explosion was not inside the walkie-talkie?
No, because doctors, they would have found the casing. It was a metal housing. So had that metal housing been present, it would have been readily found and easily identifiable. It was an aluminum case.
Dr. Omali took the stand on Tuesday, stating that PNC government undoubtedly killed Dr. Walter Rodney, as nothing could convince him that the state then was not responsible for the historian's death. Assistant Lead Counsel to the Commission, Lashmi Rahamat, summed up the day's proceedings.
Today we had Dr. Omali completing his evidence. He has maintained that the death threats he received, he's of the opinion and the belief that they were not received by any member of the PPP, neither were they part of that particular political organization. What he said is he believes that he was targeted because he was a member of the WPA and he was anti-government, and he believes that those threats on his life came because of that and came from the state and the Burnham-led administration. We also saw Mr. Rohit Kanai enter the box today. He is a name that has come up throughout these proceedings from the time it commenced. He is also a member of the WPA since back in the 1980s, 1970s. he has given this commission technical expert evidence. What that means is he was deemed an expert, and he was then allowed to give expert opinions in relation to an examination of Dr. Skewes' report, and it related completely to the device that is alleged to have been in Dr. Walter Rodney's lap that exploded. Based on his conclusions, he told the commission that after doing his analysis, he is of the opinion that firstly, the device was activated by an external signal. What that means is that it had to be another signal which was away from the device that was sitting in Dr. Rodney's lap. He indicated that the range of that type of Harris portaphone could have been within 2 miles. He said that he used Google Maps and he checked to see where John Street is from where Russell Street is, and he indicated that that is about a half a mile, which is within range, which means that if the transmission came from Russell Street, where Gregory Smith is alleged to have been living or have been the evening when the device was collected, if a signal came from there to John Street, where the explosive device went off, therefore it would have been within that 2 mile range to have activated whatever the device was that was on Dr. Rodney's lap. Secondly, he dispelled any indication that the device went off accidentally. What he's saying is that given the nature of the explosive, TNT, which is military grade explosive, it is bulletproof. It cannot even be activated if it's shot at. There is some static friction that can activate it if it is touched. But what he is saying, because Dr. Skewes and Dr. Johnson both said that the hands of Dr. Rodney were intact, that means he was not touching the device, and that means it was just lying in his lap, which means accidental triggering of the device through touching is ruled out. He further went on to say that he is of the opinion that the amount of explosive use had to have been at least 4 ounces. He said it was such a small quantity because of the fact that the post-mortem report and Dr. Skewes' report tells us that the heart of Dr. Rodney was intact. However, he indicated that the lower limbs were affected by the explosion. And he's saying if there was more than 4 ounces, then Donald Rodney, who was sitting right next to Dr. Walter Rodney, would have died. And he's saying the mere fact that he was in such close proximity and he did not die, the mere fact that the heart, everybody knows the human anatomy, and everybody knows where your heart is located from where your legs are. So if the device was only triggered, and when it triggered, your legs were affected, but the top half of your body is not affected, he's saying that that is a clear indication that it was a small amount of explosive that was used. The rest of his conclusions went on to examine the theories put forward in Gregory Smith's book, Assassination Cry of a Failed Revolution. And he has dispelled and dismissed the propositions put forward in that book, claiming that there was a toy walkie-talkie. First and foremost, he's saying that it could never have been a toy walkie-talkie because toy walkie-talkies do not operate on such high frequency that the Harris portaphone model operates on. He's saying that either way, the toy walkie-talkies would not be able to have the same circuitry, the system, like the high grade of the Harris portaphone. He's saying that a toy walkie-talkie will cost less than a Harris portaphone model, which was retailing, according to the catalog he looked at, around $800 back in 1980, 1979. What is clear is that if it was a toy walkie-talkie, then the lower frequency would mean that interference from outside sources would not be possible. Furthermore, he said that even in the Harris portophone, there could not have been interference from an outside frequency because of the military grade of the equipment. He went on to examine also in the Gregory Smith book the claims in relation to there being no available secure signal. Now, for there to be a secure signal in a toy walkie-talkie, he's saying that is just ridiculous. And he went on to explain that if you have a toy walkie-talkie, you would not be looking for a secure channel to communicate and have that secure frequency. But in fact, it's a toy. And either way, it would be operating on a lower frequency than the 151.025 megahertz frequency that Dr. Skews said is more than likely the frequency of the device that was found, or the remnants of the device that was found after the explosion took place. He went on to indicate that this frequency which was calculated was found because of the crystals that were discovered after the explosion took place. There were other aspects of his testimony in relation to his findings and dispelling what Gregory Smith would have said in his book. Tomorrow, he is going to be cross-examined on more specific issues in relation to his theories, where he compared Dr. Skewes' report, where he compared the Dr. Johnson's report, and where he compared also the book Assassination: Cry of a Failed Revolution. So we look forward to the cross-examination tomorrow, and we would be in a better position to give an entire overview once his evidence is completed on the technical aspects.
Who's expected after him?
After Rohit, we do have Mr. Trenton Roach, whose name has come up before. You would recall that his name was mentioned since the police files were tendered by Crime Chief Leslie James. He is the man who Mr. Ignatius McCrae would have asked to examine some devices and equipment that were removed from Gwendolyn Jones's house, and she was reputed to be the reputed wife of Gregory Smith, and he was reputed to have been staying there. So his evidence is to come after Mr. Kanai.